It's 7:07. I'm Daedalus Howell. We have the reprise visit of Tony Kashani. He's a professor and public intellectual author who, last time we spoke, we talked about how movies affect and shape our self-concept and our perception of the world at large. Today, if you're amenable, I'd like to talk about media literacy and what's happened in terms of how we consume and how we understand media these days.
Let's start with, if I may, with the need for critical media literacy in the United States of America as a whole. 35, 50 years of anti-intellectualism.
What are you talking about?
Well, exactly, America and all the rest of it. Social media is rampant with that sort of thing. Has led us to where we are now. The school system transformed from a site of pedagogy for intellectualism, for critical thinking, into a factory for turning brilliant little minds that start with kindergarten, first grade, and so on, into conformist functionaries of the corporate system that has sort of taken over the entire infrastructure of government, and so there's a democracy for corporations,
right,
and oligarchy ruling the average citizen. So, I mean, those are the roots, in abstraction, of course, right?
What was the impetus for that? Whose big agenda was this?
And this is a great question because we could get specific with this.
If you know the guy.
I know the guy behind the guy, and also the gal behind the guy. Of course, I'm talking about Margaret Thatcher.
I thought you were going to say Ayn Rand.
Yes. And Hillary Clinton is not really helping matters much. Just to have a point of departure, historically speaking, we could go to the days of Reagan, where he successfully, not him personally, but his Reagan Team Reagan, if you like, successfully using the Margaret Thatcher model and sort of upping the game, as it were, started spreading anti-intellectualism as the norm. And culminating in the project of neoliberalism, where you just take away regulations, you bust unions, and you go after schools. And how they did that was actually through intellectual means, and this is the irony of it. They started, of course, I'm speaking mostly of the right wing, but the left wing kind of transformed into center, and then eventually today has turned into the right wing. By setting up think tanks and pouring money into think tanks where intellectuals who learned from perhaps Machiavelli and perhaps read Dr. Faustus Marlowe's brilliant play, but sort of didn't understand it quite, that at the end Dr. Faust paid heavily for this.
The Faustian bargain.
Right, and so they made the bargain, and they've turned our school system, professional organizations, intellectual centers of our society into professional, functionary producing organizations.
And so we're basically minting the cogs for the machine, and those cogs help facilitate the corporate state. We've productized our children into these units that can plug into a system that helps sustain the system.
Yeah, okay. I mean, of course, you and I we're simplifying things, but I mean,
that's pretty complicated for me. But
maybe it's but there's another point of departure that we can look at.
But why do that, though? I mean, why did that happen? How did it happen? But what was the impetus to do that?
Are we talking about, should I become theological here and talk about, the notion of greed here that enters the picture, domination?
Is it really as simple as greedy jerks wanting to run the world?
I think it's a little more complex than that. I think it's,
ideologically motivated jerks.
I mean, Schopenhauer said it famously, or perhaps for some people infamously, that the human existence is an error.
Right.
Of course, he tried to redeem himself by saying that the only thing that can transform us and save us in some ways is music. And today we can sort of expand on that, say the arts, also sports in some ways, which we can talk about because I'm seeing a phenomenon emerging as a result of sports being a pillar of our culture here, and how that it has the potential to transform us and bring us, usher in a new form of intellectualism.
I'm skeptical about that because sports is such a commodity producing phenomena, you know.
Yeah, as you should be.
Yeah.
And you know, that requires, and of course that's going to be like a few chapters of the book that I'm working on critical media literacy. But coming back to why this is, well, we live in a capitalistic society, so very early on, say post-industrial revolution, this society and other societies in the Western hemisphere embraced the idea of transforming the lord system, the oligarchy, into a market economy where the lords can become the CEOs and business owners and so forth, and capitalizing on exploitation of resources, including human beings as labor, and so on. So collectively, that changed the value system of America. And
we've always the value system of America.
Yeah, exactly.
We brought people over to enslave to build America.
Yeah. And prior to that, we committed genocide against the Native Americans who were here, and just called it getting rid of savagery and killing weeds and so forth, right? And erased it from history books, which fortunately is coming back because chickens do come to roost. It turns out. So we have that collectively creates this system where people actually, they develop ethics around this way of thinking. And so to say they're unethical is, I think, technically incorrect. They have the ethics of exploitation, ethics of injustice.
These are an ethos that's been engendered into our society almost from the get-go. So it's invisible to us. We don't understand that. It's a necessarily exploitive system.
Yeah.
We don't see that.
I often say when something becomes ubiquitous, then it's invisible. It's like the iPhones.
Right.
Yeah, or other smartphones.
We don't think of them as extraordinary anymore. Yeah.
No, it's like an ashtray sitting on people's tables, So that's what it is, the mentality. I mean, you talk to young people that go to business schools and so forth, they think that this is the way to live life, to look for opportunities to exploit resources. They don't see it as immoral acts to step on other people, to be career opportunists. And unfortunately, this has permeated sites of intellectualism, like the academy. You go to university after university, and this is the way where professionals have taken over, and intellectuals are marginalized. And if somebody speaks the truth and is not popular for the ethos of the day, or it's not part of the zeitgeist of the university, that person is extracted or marginalized and kept in its place.
So the anti-intellectualism is the result of the fear that intellectuals may query the system or interrogate the system, and thus perhaps reveal what's actually happening.
Absolutely.
Again, to be reductive, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to borrow something from Antonio Gramsci, the Italian philosopher who went to jail and later, coming out of jail, died as a result of being the intellectual, speaking truth to power. It is the moral duty of an intellectual to speak the truth. I tend to subscribe to the non-consequential form of ethics, which says, the maxim is that you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. You don't do it because you will benefit down the road, like the karma idea, or somebody else is going to benefit. You just do it because it's the right thing to do as a human being to regain dignity of humanity and so forth.
Well, let's regain the dignity of humanity after these messages.
Okay.
We're back on 707. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're talking with Tony Kashani. We left off talking about doing the right thing for its own sake and not for any perceived reward, future or otherwise. Why is that so hard for us to accept as a mode of being? Why aren't we built like that?
Well, I think, again, borrowing from another Western philosopher, if you like, Rousseau, we are built like that, but this kind of tendencies gets suppressed, and right now it's buried under the manure of anti-intellectualism. Harry Frankfurt, philosopher out of Princeton, wrote a nice little book called On Bullshit,
Yeah.
And, he says that bullshit is a salient feature of our culture. And he's absolutely dead on with that. And we tend to think that we recognize bullshit, which we do, but we participate in it too. But we also have this sort of inclination to think that we're immune to it. We're not. Case in point being how the election campaigns are going on right now and so on.
Any kind of media, man. I live and breathe bullshit.
Yes.
Because that's what is demanded by my readers.
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of media and connecting the dots, the historical dots, there's another point of departure that I think it merits much attention. 1996 Telecommunications Act was signed by our very own Bill Clinton, who is looking at the prospect of returning to the White House and having more fun. In 1996, he wrote this act, it became law, allowing big corporations to come and consolidate ownership of pretty much all of media, because corporate media is the dominant 500-pound gorilla, as you well know. And what that did was the media owners were the same kind of people that were running other businesses. Like General Electric is right now is one of the major owners of all of media. So you got a handful, like 5, and sometimes it becomes 6 conglomerates that own everything. And they are in cahoots with that sort of umbrella that Reaganism brought to our society. And they grab the umbrella, they bring it around, and they produce things like reality TV, which one of its stars is running for president now.
Right.
And it's perfectly acceptable for people, for him to come and just speak nothing but bullshit. And yet at the same time, people are like, oh, well, dismiss that because he's our favorite uncle who comes to our living room every day and he's entertaining and he talks big and winning and so on. And that becomes part of the ethos of society. So the consolidation of ownership and the convergence culture that comes along with that, because technology is improving at the same time, and a removal of ethics.
Right.
These are keys, at least the way I see it, with clarity, I have to say, where people are teaching our children and then adolescents and then later adults that enter the workforce that the market, the so-called free market, is an ethics in itself.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and it prescribes a kind of behavior that's acceptable. It requires us, if we want to participate in our society, to adhere to this sort of embedded ethos, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What happens to our critical faculties? What happens to the ability to see that? Has that been bred out of us? Can we regain it? How do we see it for what it is and break free of it? And can you without living in the streets? How do you participate in the culture freely, and purely, without having to be part of the system?
This is a very good question. When Barack Obama became president of the United States, lots of Americans were happy, and people around the world were hopeful that America...
They gave him the Nobel Peace Prize just for showing up.
Yeah, just for being black, basically. Right. Yeah. He represented the entity, if you like, not just the person, but the entity that, as you were, asking this really mind-probing, and I really don't have a clear answer to that, but I can respond to it this way, saying he represented this entity that people were hoping could come into the system and subvert the system and turn it into a more just system, or at least close to what we see in places like Sweden or Finland or Norway.
I think he's a fundamentally great president. However, he was the brand known as hope, right? And turns out he's a real person who is a political animal and who works within that system because he's part of that system.
Yes, always has been.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily.
Well,
at least I would imagine in his own observation.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
But
I can go with that.
But I can't see a way to break out of this and still be a functioning member of society, because society has so prescribed that this is how it must operate.
Right.
Even artists are not artists anymore; they're creative entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's no writers aren't writers or narrative designers.
Yeah.
There's all of this infrastructure that's been imposed upon us, and I think my generation, Gen X, was probably the last to be untouched or if not touched, or untouched rather, we resisted it until it eclipsed us. Right?
Yeah, and what you say
Reagan was president for half my life at 16, right?
Wow,
so I only got half of the toxicity of it. Where are you? What's your?
About the same. About the same. I didn't understand what was happening when Reagan became president. I was like, hey, this guy looks good. He says, make my day, blah blah, you know. And he looks good. He was an actor and so forth. And he even played football in college. He was terrible at those occupations, but he was a great actor as you know, acting as a president and so forth. But you are right. But in some ways, I'm also I wouldn't say in disagreement, but I'm seeing other perspectives on what you're saying. Again, let me think.
I'm happy to be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Rousseau said that we are born free, but in chains everywhere, and there's so much truth to that. And that's essentially what you're saying here. You're saying that no matter what we do, we're entangled with the system. I mean, I drove a car from my house to come here to this studio, and I'm driving a car that I'm leasing to a corporation. And, you know, I'm trying to be reasonable, but at the same time, I enjoy driving a nice car that's comfortable because I spend some of my time in a car. So I have to work for private universities to make a living. And some of those private universities are run by people who are, even though, you know, it's nonprofit, still run by people with business mind and so on, or even the public university or the college right next door here that is our public community college. The business model has taken over. So no matter what we do, we are sometimes buried under the manure of professionalism and the system, if you like, and sometimes we're just sort of like fighting with it and trying to somehow adjust ourselves to it. It's kind of like living with a disease.
Right.
It doesn't kill you right away, but it just lingers on with you.
Yeah.
And so on. But
I mean, do you feel compromised as an intellectual?
I feel that sometimes, sometimes. There are times
given the model of intellectual you describe, where you have to speak truth to power and you have a moral responsibility to do so, and yet you have to get your nice car.
Yeah,
that's subsidized by your good job.
Right,
you know?
right. Well, you know, I had a professor that used to say this quite a lot to different students. He used to say, well, you know what the difference between a Marxist and a liberal is? I say, no, what, professor? He'd say, a liberal is a Marxist with 2 kids and a mortgage.
I love it. On that note, let's take a break. You're watching 707. We got Tony Kashani. We'll be right back. It's 707. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're having a spirited conversation with Tony Kashani, returning guest, one of the few we've actually invited back. Welcome back. Sports. You think this may be a hope? It may be an antenna that may attract the right signal that could be transformative to culture and awaken it back to the truth of itself, rather than this machinery that we're currently involved in. I clumsily set up.
Yeah, I do think that. But at the same time, I could be proven wrong. You know, 6 months down the road, the whole thing could fizzle out.
See, when I think of sports, my knee-jerk reaction is spectacle. You know, we're in the Coliseum again. Maybe that's just my own prejudice, but how can that phenomena liberate us?
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. We were talking about how the system operates and how we're all entangled with the system and so forth. Our culture, if there is such a thing in America, you know, Gandhi had his say about that. Our culture is enamored by sports. Our kids grow up with it, whether they participate or not. It's part of it. I, of course, have my own biases because I've been an athlete almost all my life and at different levels. Competing, I've been competitive, I've been recreational and so on. But right now, you know.
Gambler. No.
Yeah, no gambling, but.
Just kidding.
So I do have that bias, but I do think that sports is transformative.
To the individual?
To the individual as well as society. And right now we're seeing, societally speaking, something like what I wrote in a recent article that got published by Dissident Voice. I wrote that, you know, what Colin Kaepernick started. Initially, you know, it was ridiculed and corporate media was,
when he sat down for the national
corporate
anthem,
media was looking for some sensational thing to boost the ratings because preseason NFL, nobody watches that.
Right.
But here it is. This guy, is black. He's got tattoos. He's outspoken and so forth. And he's doing this, and it's offensive to people. To whom is it offensive? So it speaks about the codes of racism that exist. It used to be blatant. Now it's under a code. So when he did that, I immediately thought, well, okay, this might transform sports media. And it might affect the little athletes that we have.
Because it's politicized sports media?
Yes.
Okay.
Always has been, but it's been a marginalized faction of sports media.
I remember, I was too young for Muhammad Ali, but I dig him, so I kind of look back at the footage and stuff, and it's fascinating what he was able to achieve. But you're right, there's like these isolated moments in culture.
So what he did it was a teaching moment, because right now the sites of pedagogy, some of them are in the classroom, some are in churches, some are in community centers, but the majority of sites of pedagogy are on the football field as well as the television screen.
Interesting. Or iPad screen, what have you.
There is a famous line, well, I wouldn't say famous, but a line that stood out to me in the movie Concussion with Will Smith, that didn't get any kind of notice. It should have. Where his boss is telling him, so you're taking on an organization that owns Sunday. And it's true. It says it used to be the church that owned Sunday, but now it's the NFL. And it's the 500-pound gorilla that I was talking about. Now here's a backup quarterback who's hated by many people and so on because he's standoffish and he's a millionaire and so on. Spoiled brat, what's he doing? He's just trying to take advantage of muddy waters and so on. But that's not what he was doing. He had done his homework. I took a leap of faith and say, hey, I think this guy has transformed. I think he had a moment of radicalization. And sure enough, he's been hanging out with people that are involved with Black Lives Matter, and he's been studying because he was rehabbing his injuries and so on. He is a laborer for the system, and he understands exploitation now. Maybe before he was just too indoctrinated to understand that.
No, before he won the prize.
I mean, he almost became the Super Bowl MVP, one pass short of becoming the MVP. But today, he's become the emblem for others to look up to. They are role models, the athletes. The system has been pushing these guys forward and saying, hey, become the sales pitch man for this product or that product. Go into the community centers and pretend to be the benevolent person because our organization is benevolent and so on. And eventually, the education was transformed inadvertently by the system. And so these guys are becoming more consciously aware and becoming conscientious, if you like, and they are speaking up. Now, I'm really looking forward to the NBA season starting, not because I'm a Warriors fan, which I am, not because, I play the game and so on, but because I want to see the social activism taking place.
You perceive a foreshadowing happening
Absolutely.
here.
Now, if I'm wrong, invite me back here and say, hey, you were wrong, man,
No, I hope
I'll
you're
get
right.
more TV exposure.
I think it can be really exciting, but also very useful. Into kind of breaking through a lot of the BS that's been polluting our consciousness the last 30 years since Reagan, I guess, 35 years?
Let's say 35 years.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible, the level of toxicity in our systems that we've inherited, and it's only been amplified by the internet and other technologies.
This is true,
Yeah, so what do you think is going to happen with the election?
Oh, the election.
Yeah.
Interesting. The theater, right?
The
spectacle that every 4 years, they produce, and the producers are becoming more and more sophisticated. But this year there's been a challenge against them, and that is the public citizen is sort of understanding the bullshit that it gets produced, known as presidential election and other things that are happening. I am predicting a Hillary Clinton presidency, which is going to be marred by all kinds of problems. I hope that she doesn't start a war with another country and get things more muddier. This whole spectacle with Donald Trump is sort of flushing out the problems that we were speaking about this past half hour with lack of intellectualism and how critical media literacy is so important because it's the media outlets that are producing this spectacle. So I'm not really concerned about presidency. What I'm concerned about is locally, voting for for some propositions and so forth.
Do you think that's what's going to happen is we're going to turn our back a little bit on the national politics and get more regional in our thinking? Because
I think it's already happening.
Yeah.
It's already happening. And we have the movement, political revolution movement by Bernie Sanders to thank. Although it's not Bernie Sanders that started this, it's the young people that supported Bernie Sanders that started it. So it's the masses.
Do you think the young people are more media literate than prior generations, or are they more media savvy and they know how to use the media differently?
They are media savvy, they're literate, but they're not critically media literate. And this is why I think if President Obama is watching, we need a K through 12 critical media literacy program, systemic critical media literacy program in our educational system. Just as Canadians have, Australians have, the Swedes have it, the Germans have it, and the UK is starting to really develop it. We need it. We desperately need it.
Now, if the Clinton cabinet opens up a critical media czar position, would you accept it if offered?
The compromise that we were talking about? Yeah. And they put the microphone in front of my face and say, you're the greatest, and so on. Next thing you know, I'm a corporate functionary.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think they'd be calling me. But if they did, I would seriously consider it and look at the benefits package now.
Yeah.
But, well, I don't know. It's a good question.
It's you or Robert Reich, one of the two. I know they've got a short list. Yeah.
Well, I'm in the gray area, so maybe they'll look at the gray area and see what happens.
Tony Kashani, thank you as always for coming on. I hope you come back very soon. You've been watching 707. Until next time.
It's been a great pleasure. Yeah.